Grasshoppers, we are back. And that friendly face, I haven't actually seen that face in a long time. That is one of my old college hockey coaches, Alan Hammerneck. He was an assistant coach at Northern Michigan University way back in the late 70s. How you doing there, bud? Good to see you.
Hey, good, Tom. Good to see you as well.
So we hadn't talked a long time, and it was funny. This is a while ago we had this conversation. You told me back, I didn't know this, that back in the day when we were practice in Northern Michigan, if something ever happened, like if I got knocked down, I had a hard time controlling my temper, I guess you'd say. And you coaches would all get together to decide whether you should cancel practice or not because you didn't know how I was going to handle getting knocked out.
Yeah, I remember that because I think it was by accident. Somebody kind of ran into you. They didn't actually knock you down. It was just kind of an accident and caught you at the wrong spot. And, of course, I knew you never liked that, right? And you'd get up. And then I remember saying to Coach Comley, or as a Coach Hookwith, I said, geez, maybe he's got that look in his eye. Maybe we should cancel practice here. Somebody's going to get hurt. Because I know you didn't take mercy on your teammates at all either, Tom, right? I mean, you were, when you got kind of that look in your, everybody got scared, right? So we said, we don't want to get anybody hurt here. Maybe we should just do some chalkboards or something here for a little bit, let them cool down.
It was so funny. When you told me that, it was so funny because I'd forgotten that I was that bad. I just I lose my mind. I remember one time Coach Conley was really good. We had a guy on the team, Jeff Taskoff, small little guy, great teammate. And he had a great shot. He was a great golfer, had the whole movement and everything. So he brought him over one day and he was going to teach me how to do a slap shot. Well, I couldn't pick it up, and I got so mad. I think I was like almost in tears. I was so mad. I was just couldn't answer. So yes, I had to work on my temper a little bit like that.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. But you did kind of get it under control after a while. But,
yes, it did. But I think by the time the senior year came around, I was much better than I was. Man, I was thinking it was funny. You and I tell old stories about some of that stuff there. That was a blast. I tell people all the time that was one of the best. And people always said that college is going to be the best 4 years of your life, and that was a great 4 years. We had a great bunch of guys and great college students and great coaches too. So,
well, I used to remember too, Tom. Sometimes people talking about fighting and hockey and all that stuff, and I always said, well, I never, I was kind of I like kind of fighting and hockey. They said, I never really saw anybody get hurt that bad in hockey till one time you're in a fight. It was at Western Michigan with a guy by the name of Kelly Scott. And I remember. I saw from the press box, right? And then that's when I really saw somebody get hurt. So after anybody asked me about Tom Laidlaw, I say, well, if you got in a fight with Tom, you wouldn't just have a black eye or a bleeding nose. You'd be leaving with a neck brace because he hit you so hard, your neck muscles were all kind of torn. So I was a little bit changed my view there. Somebody could get hurt badly.
What's funny about what's funny about that fight too? The general manager Neil Smith, who was general manager of the Rangers and won the Cup. So he was on that team in Western Michigan.
Yes.
He told I can't remember what started that fight, but he told me later on that he had skated by. It was at the end of a period. He sprayed me with a water ball. Neil Smith did. I thought it was Scott. Turned around, we went at it.
Oh, geez. Well, I told Neil after that. I said, Neil, you're such a coward. You didn't step in to help him, right? Oh. I said, shame on you, Neil. Shame on you, Neil. Right? God. But anyhow. He's a good fella, Neil, and it's a good laughs over that. But so I remember a few guys not faring too well when they tangled with you, Tom. That's for sure.
We had my poor parents too. So my mother and father. I think it was a Friday night. So we played. For who don't know, it was in college. There we played Friday and Saturday night. And you were not supposed to fight. If you got in a fight, you'd miss the next game. My parents had driven all the way over to Kalamazoo, Michigan, from Brampton, Ontario, to watch us play. It was a Friday night, so I got thrown out, and they weren't going to see me play the second game. Most of the first game was gone too. But
I remember that very clearly. Very clearly.
Yeah, it's definitely about good times. All right, so now you have got a company. You left coaching and you got into what did you do after you left coaching?
After I left coaching, what I did is I came back to LA Lake. I worked for a mining company, and I started working in industrial engineering, and then I got into the training department. So I started doing some training and did several kind of startups. So that's really where I kind of got my interest in training. And then I just kind of worked for a couple of different companies, and then until I ended up starting my own consultancy back in the early 2000s. So I was always.
You say training people, train them mentally, get the mental side of the training?
This was just industrial training, like for startups, and we worked in the mining business. Would be people how to drive trucks or work in the process milling side of it, that type of stuff. So it's kind of industrial training. So my background was in education. That's where I got my degrees are in education. So I didn't use it in the educational field, but I did use it in the industry really to to do it. So then from there, I kind of went into the human resources aspect of it. And then that's where I got into kind of the talent management and acquisition piece of it, because I knew from my experience in human resources, if you made a mistake at the hiring stage, it's something I was going to end up dealing with later on. So I always took an interest in it to save myself work, because there's nothing that kind of creates more anxiety and stress than people issues. So that's why I was really kind of interested on the front end of it, is making sure we got the hiring right. And if we did, we really wouldn't have any problems down the road. So that was kind of where my interest was. And so that's kind of what I did. So I just continued to do that. So most of my HR career was in human resources, talent acquisition, and management. And I also did work in the risk management side of it as well.
Right. So now you've started, now when I'm part of it too, I guess you started it, but I'm part of the company as well, Core 5 Analytics. So basically, in my terms, I'll let you speak to it too. So particularly with athletes, hockey players, but it doesn't have to be just hockey players. The drafting process is kind of a tricky one. You can go and evaluate the skill level on the ice, but then you really got to get to know the individual too. Like, what kind of problems are going to come down the road? Is he a great guy? What kind of character person is he? So your Core 5 Analytics, you've got a test that you utilize, that you have the players complete. And then from that test, you got different categories where you can then give that to whoever the coaches, the general managers, the scouts, whoever needs it, that analyzes the character of the player. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, it is, Tom, and that's exactly the way that it works. And of course, that you've heard probably on shows, lots of NHL coaches or general managers say they always know the player as a player, but they don't know him as a person, right? So when you're drafting, we know that when the talent band gets narrow, there's lots of people who can play hockey, right? But there's the ones that do make it how they separate themselves from the herd is on the basis of their character. So that's their work habits, how they prepare, all the work that they do to separate themselves from the herd. So that's what we do, is we measure character. And the way it works, Tom, is the team will give us traits that they're looking for in a player. So what we can do is, through our assessment process, we use 5 different assessments that we use in terms of creating the measures for those particular traits that the team are looking for. And we assess the player, and then we can, because we've got the assessment result and everything is kind of converted to numbers, it allows us to put players into ranges. And what we do is we put them either as a kind of meet standard, exceed standard, or below standard. So we put them into groupings like that. And then once we have those groupings made, we can compare one player to another. So say, for example, if there's a team in the NHL that wants to draft a right-hand shot offensive defenseman type of thing, right? So they could say, okay, we're interested in these 2 candidates. And once we've got their assessment data, we can say, okay, we think this player is going to be better than this player for these reasons. And so we don't only tell the teams what the players like, we also can show them how they compare to the traits that they're looking for in the players they want to bring into the organization. So that's one thing that's really specific in terms of, there's all kinds of assessments and they tell you what a person's like, but we have the ability to tell you how he compares to exactly what you're looking for. And so that's kind of the process we use is psychometric assessments. We have 5 of them, and we gather that data so we can measure it, quantify it, and that allows us to compare one player to another.
So obviously the athlete knows that he's getting tested. How is it then that he can't, or you design the questions so that he can't kind of rig the answers like the way he wants? He wants to be portrayed a certain way.
Well, the way that we do it is we're very indirect in the questions that we ask, and you can remember from taking it yourself, right? Yeah. It's very hard to figure out. So we don't ask, do you get nervous and before games or anything? It's very, very, it's hard to figure out why these questions are being asked. So the questions are kind of disguised, because what we get at the end, you couldn't make sense of why the questions were asked, but that's kind of how it works. Right. So once we have that data, then we look, there's certain trends we look for to see if somebody's manipulating their responses, or there's aspects we look with regards to timing and other kind of profiles we get. So we can tell. So one of the ways that we make sure that the organizations we work with understand is how to use the tool. So, for example, if we get something, and that's why when we work with the scouting staff, we'll get them maybe to ask questions to the player, what did you think about taking the assessment? So, the front part of it is very unique, Tom. Remember those list of 18 items, right? Yep. So if you've taken the test yourself, you'd be able, that would be something that stuck out in your mind. Yeah. So what we do is when we get the assessment results, we have that goes to the scouts, and the scouts read it, and it should line up with what they see. And if it doesn't line up with what they see, then we go back. It's like kind of like solving a crime or a mystery, right? You got to go back and ask some questions. So the first thing we ask are, did he follow the instructions? Because if you don't follow the instructions, the input's could be wrong. So they have to be in their normal state of mind. They have to be uninterrupted when they take it. Right. So there's some certain, and then we can tell by looking at times if they're trying to manipulate, because somebody takes a long time, they could be trying to manipulate their responses. Because really what it is, it's questions, asking the player questions about himself, answered by himself. So if he followed the instructions, it should be pretty accurate. And so if we don't, sometimes we have to get the player to take it over if we think, oh, there's kind of a big mismatch here between what our report says and what the scout says. And then we go back and try and sort that out. And so maybe the player has to take it again or whatever. So we try and do that investigation first to make sure that the instructions have been followed. That's the number one thing. And then we can go back and ask specific questions to see if there's been any manipulation of the responses.
So when I went on the TV show Survivor, I talked about this a lot, how we were in LA for a week for casting, and they did all these tests, a lot of physical tests, but way more psychological testing on it, similar tests that you're talking about. And then at the end of the week, they sit down with the doctors and they evaluate the results. And it was funny because the very nice lady, she says, first thing she says, Tom, you have a hard time with empathy. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't even know what the word means. I don't think, So we went back and forth discussing empathy. And I think, I don't know if she was totally, maybe my way of dealing was different, where I didn't say, well, poor you all the time. I felt like, okay, then I get a solution. But either way, it was interesting because it really made me, I hope I've improved on it now. So it's interesting to take the tests, and there's some areas in your life that you may need to improve on. So with these young athletes, do you go through the results with them and then say, okay, you can work on those things and then help them work on fixing any kind of problems they may have?
Yeah, we do. So most of the teams we work with at the NHL is we do the assessment. We give them a short report, and once they draft the players, we give them a coaching report, and how they use that is kind of up to them. But the work we do a lot of work with the Erie Otters or the OHL. So what we do is we assess their players every year. So they get a new coaching report. And so from there, and that's really how we build a development piece, because once we have that initial data, we know what areas they need to work on to improve. So it's just like you said, Tom, okay, our report shows you that you need to do some work in these areas, and we have modules that we use to help them go through and improve in those areas. And because we test them year over year, we can see if there's improvement or not. So we can see which players may have are putting the work in, because if you don't put the work in, you don't get the results. Right. So we've seen that with certain players where they've not put the work in, so we don't see any growth there. But we've seen several cases. Particularly in Erie, because they've got a really good coaching staff, great ownership, a great general manager there, and they spend a lot of time working on this stuff. And so they've got the player development model they have in Erie is probably the best you'd see anywhere. It'd rival anything. I find an NHL team with a development model that they have in Erie. So ours is part of it. We're part of that process, but it's a very sophisticated model. So we're a piece of that. But that's how they do it. We spend time on it, and the way that we do it, Tom, is the delivery piece of it is we do the very little work with it. We try and get the players to do the work. So we give them a little bit of information, and they have a number of activities that they would have to think about or do or whatever, do their own research on. And then they come back. We did them this through COVID. We did it. We set up a Google Classroom setup. And we ran the players, we ran the coaching staff through it, then we ran the whole team through it. Then we actually ran their business operations group through it. So what it does is it allows them to deal with real life situations. So really what we're trying to do with our development model is accelerate the rate of development by putting them in situations that they may face in the future earlier on in their career, right? So we say, if you bring those things forward, they start thinking about things differently. Maybe this wouldn't happen to me for 2 or 3 years from now, but certainly at some point in their career, even though they're great players now, when they go to the American Hockey League or wherever they're going to go, there's going to be a spot where things aren't working out, they're not playing, right? And they're going to have issues with confidence and those types of things. So we bring those questions to them and say, how would you handle these situations? So at least when they do come up, they've at least had some experience doing it on their own, as well as hearing feedback from their own players, their own peer group, of how they would handle these situations if they occur. So we try and give them, whether it's issues related to sleep or a teammate taking marijuana or whatever happens to be the case, we give them these things, or what would you do if you weren't playing well? and you thought you should be getting more ice time. How would you handle it? So we get in little situations like that, and some people are going to call my agent. Well, that's what a lot of kids do these days, right? They don't. So we say we're going to treat them like men. So we got to get them at 15 years old thinking like a 17-year-old, and at 17-year-old thinking like a 19 or 20, because when you've heard that old statement, if I knew then what I knew now, how would that have changed your career, Tom, right?
Oh, unbelievable, yeah, no question. And it's interesting too, right? You look at Connor McDavid, so he played for Erie, correct?
Yes, we have. We did his day. That's the first year we started. Actually, was Connor.
That's an interesting case. So I look at Connor McDavid and I look at Austin Matthews, those two in particular, coming in as 18-year-olds and having the seasons they did as at the first year in the National Hockey League at 18 years old. And then you look at other players like Nathan McKinnon, for example, who's arguably one of the best players in the league right now. But it took him 2-3 years at least before he really got to his peak level. Whereas, McDavid and Austin Matthews maybe weren't at their peak level here, but were pretty good hockey players in the National Hockey League as 18-year-old players. And I think back to myself as an 18-year-old, well, you were coaching me. I was such a mudhead. There was no way I watched these kids. And it's interesting, right? Because we always talk about everything in life, but in this case, sports is probably anywhere from 60 to 80% mental. I mean, the physical part, is, it's got to flow, but you got to think, you got to be passionate, you got to be driven, you got to be motivated, all those things. But we work the opposite way, right? We physically train probably 80% more, or the physical part is probably the 80% of the training. We spend very little time on the mental part of the training in most cases, whereas you're showing, and I've certainly learned probably over the last few years even more, that you can really work on your mind and train your habits more than you probably realize you can. Again, I've learned just in the last few years how much you can really train your mind.
Well, I remember you telling me when we had a conversation a while ago what kind of caused the end of your career, and I remember you telling me it was stubbornness, right? You thought you knew your body better than the trainers knew. And at that point, you were probably well along too. So that's kind of the message that we try and convey when we do the development work, is people have tendencies to behave and act in certain ways, but it doesn't serve them well in every circumstance. So we try and relate to the player, say, okay, this is the way, these are what your natural tendencies are, but they may not serve you well in every circumstance. Have you thought about this? And is this really doing you any good? And sometimes we don't advocate that players need to change, but all they need to do is they got to recognize when their natural tendencies are hurting them. Right?
That's interesting. So let's go through that process with me then. So, like you said, so early in my career, when you saw me in college, I was stubborn, right? And I say stubborn because I was just going to make it. That was it. I was going to bowl my way through everything. I was going to get where I wanted to get. And it got me to the National Hockey League. And I was assistant captain. I won Players Player Awards, all that stuff. So I had success being that stubborn guy. And then at the end of my career, I started getting back hurt all the time. And I've told the story many times. When a great guy that was coaching us, Rick Wilson, was assistant coach in Los Angeles. He'd been through back injuries, the same thing. And he used to skate around with me all the time, say, Tom, you need to change. You need to change. And in my mind, I was like, why am I going to change when I've had success doing what I've done all along? I'm not going to get on the trainer's table. I'm not doing this exercise. This is what I do. This is how I do it. So if you were around at that time and we had the Core 5 analytics, you would have sat me down and said what to me?
Well, I said, look, you're talking, we would probably look at your profile and say, well, here's how you make decisions, right? That's because people have tendencies and that guides their decision making, right? So then we would say, okay, here's what you're doing. And, this tenacity and stubbornness is taking you to a great point in your career. But at some point, if it gets out of balance, it can hurt you, right? Why would you think Rick Wilson and the trainer are telling you this is their areas of expertise? Why wouldn't you listen to them? Why wouldn't you try it? Right? Is it working for you? Your back's not getting better. Instead of getting better, you're getting hurt more and more and more. But it makes sense to listen a little bit, try some different things, and then see how that works for you. Because that's a perfect example of somebody using their strengths to their own detriment. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that's kind of how we would kind of talk them through it and just ask questions and get them thinking about different, and say, okay, maybe I should listen to Rick, or maybe why don't I just try? What harm can it be from trying it?
Right. So right? You get these 16, 17-year-old boys playing junior hockey, 16, 17, 18, 19. And so they're going through the same thing. They've got some trait that has helped them along the way, but now it's getting in their way, and you go to them and try to get them to change. Are they pretty receptive at that age?
Yes, I think it depends on the environment they're in. I think they suffer from a lot of insecurities, right? I mean, they're just like everybody else, but they listen a little bit, but sometimes they don't listen right away. And where we see differences, certainly with players at that age, is they get hooked up in their draft year thinking they need points.
Yeah.
Right. So they're driven that if I don't get a lot of points or whatever, I'm not going to get drafted. And because of course you're saying, well, people aren't looking, they don't care how many points you got. They're looking for complete players who have complete games, right? Looking players that you can trust. So we got to get them off of that a little bit. So we try and get them. That's not in your best interest as points, right? That's not going to get you there. You need to be working on the defensive part of the game because all these other things, right? Points. That's the last thing that they probably care about, really, right? They just want to see your growth as a player and be able to play all aspects of the game. So we get them off of that and get them to focus on being a complete player rather than kind of a one-dimensional guy. So a lot of that is they're just because of social media and stuff like that. That's kind of all they hear, right? You got to be, and when you look at it, that's when you get focused on it, then you don't worry about the other pieces. And it's kind of like you having a bad back, right? You think, I'm going to do it my way. They want to score points. So there's a lot of kind of collisions that occur between the coaching staff and players, because if they're driven that way, that's not what the coaches want.
Right. And so these players then, do you find is there a difference with the talent level? Like if a fourth line player, is he more willing to learn, or is a top guy more willing to learn, or do you see any differences?
There's kind of a mix, right? I think, but we've in here we've seen a lot of kids, a number of kids that were kind of lower draft picks, or the kind of the midget draft, right? They've come in and maybe their results at the start weren't that good. And then they just started. The coaching staff worked with them, and they've ended up having really, really great careers. So there's that, and there's also players like Connor McDavid and some of those other players like Anthony Cirelli and other players that were good, and they like new stuff and they just kind of grab onto it a little bit quicker. So with some kids, it's a little more work, I think, to get them to come around. But what we would say is, okay, well. We want you to do work, and there's some point where if they're not doing work, we just kind of say, well, that's, we're going to spend our time with somebody else. Because what happens, I think, a lot with coaching staffs is they spend so much time on kids who are problems and that they neglect the good kids. So I could have took a kid like, I don't know, somebody else, and if I would have put that time into him instead of being a really good player, he would have been a great player. But we kind of neglect him because he doesn't complain, he doesn't do this, he just kind of does his thing. But you're really doing a disservice to them because there's things that he could improve on too to even make him a better player as well. So it's kind of how you're going to spend your team. And we look at players, we try and get them to think themselves as either an energy contributor or an energy consumer. Right. And if you're consuming energy, that's not what we want on the team. We want people to bring energy into the team, not be sucking energy out of the team because they have behavioral issues or take bad penalties or they're fighting teammates. So we'll work a little bit with them, but there comes a point where we say, okay, that's just not enough. Right. I mean, that's, so our interest is in working with players who want to do the work to be successful. And that we know that if they do the work that we suggest to them, that they will be successful, Right. But if they with
the Core 5 analytic test, then can you tell in advance which kids are going to want to do the work?
Yes, we have a couple of measures that we look at. We look at we have an EQ assessment that looks at their motivation, and what this particular measure of motivation is their ability to work hard at everything that they do. And we run into this, of course, with scouts as well, because we'll have a data and this player will score low in motivation. And the scout will say, okay, well, we watch this kid on the ice and in practice, he works hard. There's got to be something wrong with your results. And so we'll say, okay, well, what's the definition of motivation? Right. So we look at, there's a specific definition for it. And we say, okay, how is he doing in school? How is he doing in the weight room? How is he doing on his nutrition? How is he doing on this? And then you see, well, he likes to work hard at what he likes doing, but he's not willing to do work at things he doesn't like to do. Right. So I can remember watching an interview with Mark Giordano the first year they made the All-Star team. And the person asking him says, well, what do you think is the biggest difference between players who were here at the All-Star game and other players? And what he said was, he said the difference that he saw is that players at this level are willing to do things they don't like because they know it's good for them. And so the example that he used, he says, I don't like doing squats. He says, but I know I need to do them for my power and that stuff. He said, so what I did, he says, I just thought about it a different way. So instead of doing two-legged squats, I do one-legged squats. So somehow it seemed easier for me to do it. I didn't hate it as much. I still know I had to do it. So even if I had to do the two-legged ones, I was going to do them, but I just changed something that I was getting the same result. But I found it easier for some reason. So I think if you look at it, can people do the hard yards, right? When so that's kind of a big piece of motivation is, are you able to do the things that you don't like to do because they're good for you, right? So that's when you see kids lazy in the weight room, or they're, they don't want to get, they don't work on their sleep routines or whatever happens to be the case. Wow. And so we say we got to build routines and habits, right? And that's going to mean doing things you don't like to do. And I can remember you telling me, Tom, about when you were doing meditation and how hard it is. Yeah. So we can say, okay, well, the program we came up with in Erie, we called it Route 66. And why we called it Route 66 is because if you remember that Route 66 highway from Chicago to LA was that famous Highway Dreams Get Your Kicks on Route 66. So we said, this represents a journey that players are on, and the 66 lined up perfectly with the number of days it takes to acquire a habit. So you can go back to the kids and say, okay, well, because a lot of time they'll try something and they don't like it. Right. And I say, okay, well, how long did you try it for? Well, I tried it, a week or so. It didn't really work for me. Say, well, no, it's 66 days. Until you put in 66 days in your best effort, don't quit. Right? Because
is that what it is? 66 days to change a habit.
Yeah. That's on average, 66 days to develop a habit, a good habit. Wow. So that's it gives you an idea. And I remember you telling me about meditation, how hard meditation was. So a lot of the work that I'm sure you've had Navy SEALs on your show as well. But when you look at the very elite levels of martial arts, it's about 50% kind of technical training. It's 50% mental. At those levels, when you get to the triple black belts or whatever they got there, I mean, that's what they work on. So, and meditation's not easy, nor is breathing easy, right? I mean, you got to work on these things and develop habits. So we say we can kind of point you to the knowledge, but it's up for you to get the reps in. So then the coaches have to work. How can we build some of these reps into our practice? So say, for example, one of the big things with anxiety control is breath control. Right. So how can we incorporate that into practice or when they go in the weight room? So before they go in the weight room, maybe they got to do 3 minutes of relaxation breathing, or before the game, everybody's got to do 3 minutes of relaxation breathing, because coaches could even use it because they've had a bad game and you got to go meet with the media after. Well, before you go out there, maybe you should take some time and do some relaxation breathing before you say something you don't like when you're upset.
John Tortorella, they've done an hour.
But that's kind of how, so you build in habits, and then as you build a habit, it becomes just natural. It's part of your day.
Right? Well, I'll tell you, Al, I've definitely seen that. We've talked this. I've definitely learned. I've learned to learn now. I probably learned more in the last 3 to 4 years doing all this True Good Life that I have the rest of my life. And I have really learned, like even the motivation factor, like you said, you put it very well. Like there's probably times where I wasn't motivated for all this stuff all the time. We joked around and we learned to shoot a slap shot better. Well, I couldn't do it, and I didn't work on it enough. I should have worked at it more. And I think we can all say that, right? We can all improve on things in all of our lives, whether it doesn't have to be the physical parts, it's relationships, your job, the way you treat people, all that stuff. But again, the key is, like you're saying, you can change those things. You can train yourself to change the way you are motivated, to change your work ethic and all that too. So I like this stuff.
So one of the big things too, when you look at motivation, Tom, is purpose, right? So when you look at, as people get older, you have to have a purpose or be doing things for some reason greater than yourself.
Yep. Totally.
Right. Because if you just have yourself, you're going to run out of energy to do these things. Right. So sometimes you need things to pick up your motivation. So we've worked with some people that will say, well, one of their goals for the year is they want to be a role model for a certain group or whatever happens to be the case. So it's something that kind of gives them something beyond themselves to think about. And when you help other people, it gives you energy. Right. So there's all different pieces to it. So, and that's part of the continuous learning, because early in your career, you're just kind of concerned about you, right? And then you get later, then you start thinking, okay, what about more about others? So we're just saying, let's bring these things forward and get them thinking about others earlier in their life. Then they're going to, start building some habits and always have that as something that they're associated with and something that they have a passion with to do good. So, that's kind of how we look at it, is try and get them thinking about these things earlier than they would have if you just kind of let them evolve, right? They may not come up for a long time, but if you bring them forward and get people thinking about them, that's how they mature quicker.
No question. Again, the company is called Core 5 Analytics. This is Al Hammernick. One of my, man, I guess, how would I term you? A lot of patience back then you had to have for us coaching our team back then. Remember, so when I first went to Northern Michigan, that was the first year they had the hockey team. So all of us were all bunch of like nutty like freshmen who thought we knew everything and we knew nothing. I'll never forget one of the first road trips we went on. We actually went to Western Michigan, and the hotel happened to be right beside a liquor store. So we got in there on Thursday night. We had to play Friday and Saturday. We thought, wow, there's a liquor store right there. We got to go to the liquor store. So we were all in somebody's room. Maybe it was my room. The whole team was in there hooting and hollering and having a blast. And I think all three coaches walked in, and you're looking like, what are you doing, you idiots? We're going to play a game tomorrow. And we really didn't think we were doing anything wrong. So there's a lot of things like that you guys had to put up with. There was no upperclassmen to kind of teach us the ropes. We did some wild stuff.
I remember the first year we played you, Tom. I remember that we thought, they're just starting the program. How tough is this series going to be, right? And I can remember after that, everybody's saying, "What's wrong with these guys? They're playing so hard. It's like the Stanley Cup. It's like the first series of the year here." Yeah,
and that was we went all out 24 hours a day. That was their.
Yeah, it was it. So we remember that for sure.
It was a blast. Well, great to see you again, and I'm really honored to be part of this Core 5 Analytics. As you know, obviously you do too, but I believe in this stuff totally. The mental part of the game, mental part of life, and that's the thing about Core 5 Analytics. It doesn't just make these guys and girls better athletes; it makes them better people too. So, great stuff.
Yeah, so one of the things we get asked quite often is, are athletes different than other people? And we say, well, really, they're not. When you look at superior performers in any occupation, whether it's in medicine or engineering or the National Hockey League, the superior performers have certain things that they do well. So it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or what you are. So the work that we do is we treat people are people. They're a person first, and they're an athlete. They're their occupation second. So the stuff that we do helps in all those areas, right? So it's your character that really allows you to navigate the ups and downs of life, and the ups and downs of careers, whether it's to overcome an illness or whatever happens to be the case. People who have successfully done it have great strength of character. And that's kind of what we try and measure and work with people, because everything that we measure, Tom, is something that can be developed through structured learning and practice.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I've been so lucky in my career. I played with Phil Esposito, was a great player at the start of my career. Wayne Gretzky, Larry Robinson, Dave Taylor, those kind of players, Luc Robitaille. And I tell people all the time, I said, yes, obviously in basketball, if you want to be LeBron James, you got to be a certain height and all that. But like Wayne Gretzky was no different. Like he wasn't given some special gift, like physically, not at all. In fact, the exact opposite. But his character was through the roof. He wanted to be the best player that ever played the game, and he went to work every day. And he practiced that way too. It was that was the way Wayne Gretzky wanted to be. So I agree with that stuff totally. I think it's all stuff. I really recommend people that if they want to be great at whatever it is in their life, their relationships, their careers, if it's sports, whatever, the mental part of it is so huge, way bigger than the physical part. And you can change yourself. You can train yourself. You can make yourself stronger. The mental part. And again, if you want to get a hold of Al at all or myself, Core 5 Analytics, again, core5analytics.com. And some great stuff there, doing great work with some of these kids. So good to see you again, bud.
Okay, take care, Tom. Great talking to you.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.